Hello and welcome to our North Church Parent Podcast. We are so glad that you have joined us today. My name is Christian Velez and I am our student pastor here at North Church. Our goal is to prepare you and equip you with resources for raising awesome godly kids. Whether they're newborns or off to college, we want to do our best to prepare you for the journey ahead. We hope and pray that these conversations will prepare you to be the parent that God created you to be. If there is any topic you would love for us to discuss, please email us at parents@north.church. We would love to hear from you. Also, go ahead and subscribe to our channel wherever you're listening, as we will continue to release more and more episodes. Once again, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump into the conversation. Hello, welcome to our North Church Parent Podcast. We're excited that you have joined us. We have a great conversation ahead of us today. I'm excited for this conversation, but more than anything, I'm excited to have you with us, Michael Across. Now, North Church and parents, I want you to know a little bit about him. He has an amazing family, you have beautiful kids. So, Michael, tell me a little bit about you and your wife, your kids, and what you do.
Okay. Well, I'm Michael Cross, married to Brooke Cross. We've been married coming on about 8 years. Like I said, we have two beautiful children, Olivia and Owen. Their ages are 5 and 3, going on 20. So happens really fast. But I'm actually a licensed professional counselor here in the area. I work mostly, a lot of my clientele is with adolescents. And then I also work a lot with blended families and married couples. But adolescence is a big area of my expertise.
Well, Michael, I want to say thank you so much for your friendship and for your guidance, because every time I have a difficult situation with students, whether it's suicidal thoughts or kids trying to commit suicide, you are such a great resource for me and for North Church. And I want to say thank you so much, because there've been many times that I'm like, what do I do? And I don't know what to do, but I know who to call. And you have walked me more than one time through what are the steps to take. So I want to say thank you so much for what you do, the work that you do with adolescents. And thank you for being here with us today. Now, before we start our conversation, I'm going to toss this to Christian Melman, our podcast producer, because he has an icebreaker question for you.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us. This is going to be an amazing conversation. I'm super excited. Thank you for being here. My icebreaker question for you is, what is your favorite Star Wars movie and why? I know you're a huge Star Wars fan, so it might be a tough one, but what is your favorite Star Wars movie and why? I'm going to throw it back to y'all.
My favorite Star Wars movie.
You're a big fan.
I'm a big Star Wars fan, so this is a really hard question. I have to go back to, it will probably always be Empire Strikes Back for me. I'm an 80s kid. So original trilogy was something I grew up with, Empire Strikes Back for me, besides like the big Darth Vader being Luke's father reveal. For me, that film just had a very ominous tone. It was different than all the other Star Wars movies. It just will probably always be my
What
favorite.
do you think about people that don't like Star Wars?
You want my real honest answer? I feel like they're missing out on a really cool part of life. So.
Okay. I've tried. I've tried to watch them, and now with my wife, Natalie just doesn't even want to try to watch them. Like, she's like, no, we're not watching that. They're too long. So I'm like, I guess I'll never watch them.
Hey, I was there. My wife did the same thing. I know plenty of people that said that exact same thing. But hey, eventually they got them on to watching them. Just take it slow, one movie at a time. If you have to break it up, but there's hope. There's still hope, Christian.
Good. Well, Michael, we have based this podcast on this verse. It's Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way he should go, even when he's old, he will not depart from it. And parents, we want to help you to navigate difficult conversations with your children. I know that it's not easy at times, but it's something that we must do because we want to control the narrative. If we allow school and friends to influence them, it will be much harder for them to have a biblical worldview. And that's what this podcast has been based on. It's like helping you have conversations with your children so your children have a biblical worldview. What does the Word of God says about this particular topic? Now, today's topic is difficult to have conversations. It's really awkward and hard for most parents, and most parents avoid it, and they think, well, they know. They already know. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that parents can make is just assume that their kids know.
Oh, yeah.
So, Michael, we're talking about pornography and sex, and I'm grateful for you because I know you work with many adolescents and you help many, many families through these difficult questions. But I want to ask you the question, why is it important that we have this conversation with our kids?
For one, it's a very awkward conversation to begin with. It's probably the one that is filled with the most shame and confusion. But it's also the conversation that the culture throws at our kids at a very young age. And in today's society, it is just all over the place. You can't avoid it.
Yeah.
So the exposure happens early.
Video games, movies, even kids' movies. Like I watch kids' movies now that I used to watch, and I hear the references, and I'm like, what the heck?
Right?
So it is so important that we are the first ones. I always tell parents that you have to be the first one having this conversation with your children. Now, what are the important key things to keep in mind while having difficult conversations with your kids?
Yeah. So there's a few things, but first and foremost, we have to remember that God is the example. Is our example for having these tough conversations. God is never afraid to confront us with the truth, and he does not shrink away from difficult conversations. And just like the scripture says over and over, I am the Lord your God, gracious and compassionate, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. That's the character that, as our Father, he shows towards us in those moments. And it's the kind of character that we need to be careful to reflect towards our kids, always reminding them that our love for them will never waver. No matter what they share with us, no matter what they've been exposed to or experienced or the kinds of questions they ask, that our love for them will always, be the same. And then, lastly, remember that this is a long-term process. This is not something that you have in one, sex talk. As so often parents want to say is, we've had that sex talk with our kids and it's like, no, it's an ongoing conversation because the exposures and the things that come will be, gradual and continuous, through life.
I love that you say that it's an ongoing conversation. And, the term I always use is this is a journey.
Right.
And you have to start early. You have to start when they're babies. Now, the amount of information that you share with your kids is totally different when they're 3, 8, 10, 12, 17 years old.
Right.
But you have to understand that this is an ongoing conversation. I hear parents saying this all the time. Well, I already had that conversation. And inside of me, I'm like, this is new things and more things thrown at them. You have to be open and be willing to continue to have that conversation because it would really determine what their view on sex is. And we, again, as Christians, what we want to point students and kids, it's to the Word of God. What does the Word of God says about sex? Why do we save ourselves for marriage? Those were not conversations really that I necessarily had. It was more, don't have sex. But I'm like, I wonder if I would have understood the reason why behind it, it would have been so much helpful for me. But it's important that we understand, hey, this is a journey. Now, when should we start talking to our kids about pornography and sex?
Well, the honest answer is probably, almost as soon as they start talking. The reason why is because, our culture starts the conversation or starts the discussion of sex and pornography at a young age. I mean, statistics show that 10% of children under 10 have been exposed to pornography.
Wow.
The average age is 11.
Talking about kids.
We're talking about kids that are being exposed to pornography. It's with the technology and the computers in our hands that we hold every day. I mean, it is just something, the TV shows, the music that we listen to, and sex and pornography is thrown at our children way before they even are even able to comprehend the idea
Yeah.
of sex. So
Yeah.
earlier the better.
I heard a person one time saying that this is like a pornograph generation. Like everything that this generation has experienced, it's around pornography. Mainly
Yeah.
because I remember when I was in middle school and even elementary school, kids will bring magazines to school.
Right.
But now nobody has to find a magazine. They have it right here.
Right there.
I was watching a guy talking about how to protect young eyes. Is the kind of like ministry that they do.
Yeah.
And they say kids can watch pornography on their phone with 3 clicks. Literally, they
Yeah.
click 3 different apps and they can watch unlimited amount of pornography that nobody can track. So and that really opened my eyes. I'm like, this is something that we need to be very involved because we can think, oh, my kids don't know about this. They kind of things I heard when I was in 4th, 5th, 6th grade, and that I knew. I mean, we're talking, this is 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Now with the technology and the resources that they have, it's even more today. So it's important that we talked about that with our children. Now, how should I start the conversation with them about pornography and sex?
So, for one thing, don't wait for them to bring it up. Like we said, we want be proactive, not reactive.
Yep.
So in order, by that I mean, find intentional and creative ways to start this conversation. The world around life in general brings many opportunities. I mean, be interested in what our kids. What your kids are doing, what they're interested in, whether it's their video games, their TV shows, the music they're listening to, the friends that they hang out with, the kinds of conversations that they hear on the bus or on the football team or whatever it may be. They have plenty of opportunities in their life if you will just take an interest and ask questions. Find out how they think about things, what they think about what they've seen or been exposed to. Billboards. God, I can remember my dad, driving by and there's a risque woman on the billboard and my dad being like, what do you guys think about that?
Yeah.
This being out in public or being dressed like that, or what do you think your dad, those kinds of things. Find those ways in daily life to bring up these conversations.
Yeah. It's good that you say that because even now at 30 years old, me and my wife, sometimes we're watching some shows and I tell my wife, I don't think this is good for me to watch,
Right.
And I mean, that takes everything. But now I have a relationship with my wife that I can say stuff like that. But but before when we started our relationship, I was kind of afraid to say something like that because I didn't want her to think, oh, this man is a perv.
Right.
And that is why we want to have those conversations because we want to know what the weaknesses of our children are. And maybe for some of them might not be, but for others, it could harm them. Let me ask you this question. How can pornography affect sex, the way that a kid see sex?
Well, the way that sex is presented in our culture is very much idolized. It's taken way out of the context of what God originally designed it for.
Man.
Sex is a beautiful thing. It was made for the enjoyment in a marriage for couples to experience together. And the way that our culture has put it out is a very selfish, idolized form that has nothing to do with love and intimacy in a marriage. And so it skews that. It gives this idea, like I said, the confusion, the shame attached to it, because it's not done in a godly manner.
Michael, I remembered when me and my wife got married, and when I had sex with my wife as a married man, I was like, it was so weird because I didn't feel shame. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is what the Bible talks about. This is how sex should feel like, where there's no shame. And when kids are watching pornography and they are having sex out of marriage, that's what they feel. The way of that shame that really the sin brings, that the enemy throws at you.
Yes.
And this is why we want to protect our children. This is why we want to have these difficult conversations because, man, I don't want any of my students to feel this kind of shame.
And part of the reason why bringing it up to them, being proactive again, and starting these conversations is that you normalize the conversation for them. You know, when you talk about training the child in the way that they should go, we want to train them to realize that, hey, when you're exposed to things that you don't understand or don't know, ask. Talk about it. Don't be afraid to talk about it. I mean, if we were, you know, I love the fact as I read the gospel that the disciples were never afraid to ask Jesus questions. You know, sometimes I read that and go, my gosh, why are they asking him that? Don't look stupid, man. You know, but the whole thing,
Jesus you're talking
right,
to.
it's Jesus you're talking to. But you know, but Jesus presented it had such a relationship with his disciples that they were never afraid to ask him questions, never afraid to look stupid. You know, that's how wisdom is gained. And we want our children to learn at a young age that these conversations should be normal, that when they have those questions, they should seek understanding and guidance, especially from trusted people. And the first people they're going to trust are going to be your parents. And so, this is kind of how we're training them is by being brought to having these conversations early makes that normal for them to do.
Are there any taboo topics to avoid in discussing pornography and sex? And I'm sure that it's totally different when you're talking to probably your daughter, that it's 5 years old. Different when you're 12. You know, so
yes. So, you know, kind of that going along that road is, you know, yes, of course, graphic details, use discretion on the age of your kids and what you're talking about, or according to what they've been exposed to, meaning that they've already brought it up to you.
Yes. I think that's the reason why I also like asking this question is because even I remember that my dad said things about sex that I didn't know. Yeah. And it opened my eyes to something I didn't know.
Your curiosity to seek other things. And, you know, they will figure it out and, you know, let them ask questions. I mean, that's okay if they ask questions and they want to know more, then be honest and share. Just, you know, be careful about the graphicness of the details that you explain. But, you know, some of the other things, avoid euphemisms. And if you're not familiar what a euphemism is when we give an alternative slang term to body parts, to sexual intercourse itself. Those kinds of euphemisms cause confusion, and they kind of alarm kids that there is something to be afraid of or ashamed of. So use technical terms when you talk with them. Don't use alternative ways of describing things. Say it as it is.
Because that's how taboos really start.
Yes.
Yeah. If like I heard when our very first parent podcast was about how to have the talk with the kids. And Candy, our children pastor, she said, you know, like we call penis, we call vagina, vagina. Otherwise it becomes a taboo. And that leads to, we don't talk about sex openly or pornography openly. So in that, I think that's a great advice, Michael, because I mean, even when I talk to kids, they try to use words like that. And I'm like, I know this is not how you talk to your friends. Like, I know this is not, you're not being real. But when it comes to parents, you feel intimidated. You feel intimidated. So let me ask you this. How should I manage, this is for parents, how should parents manage their own feelings when discussing these topics with their children without harming them?
So, you know, one point I kind of wanted to tie into the last question, but actually will fit here too, is, you know, be careful not to assume that, to assume anything when you're talking about with your kids. You know, when your kids say, hey, I already know what sex is, I already know about it, don't just breathe that big sigh of relief and, you know, stop it already, you know, because sometimes that's your own feelings of anxiety of like, oh, thank goodness they already know. Right. And don't assume that. I mean, ask questions, ask how they know, what they know, how do they see it, be curious. So, you know, your anxiety wants you to stop that conversation. So be aware of your own anxiety and don't be afraid to continue to go into that awkwardness with them. But some other ways that you're talking, you know, again, going back to the be proactive and not reactive. When you're proactive, you have the ability to be in a calm state, have your emotions under control when you have this conversation with them. You know, if you wait for your kids, you can react. Sometimes when we hear things and that shock comes up over us or that anxiety starts feeling, and we can react with anger, we can react with the anxiety, we can shut down. So the proactive allows you to be calm, but, you know, be calm and then be humble and be willing to listen, willing to learn. You know, our kids are raised in a different generation than we are. What we were exposed to, our understanding of it is different. In a lot of ways, than what they and how they are hearing about it. So to think that we don't have anything to learn from our kids, to not hear from our kids is foolish as well.
Yes, we talked about how technology works these days. We were waiting for somebody to say something in school. These kids hear something, they can do research, and you never know.
Yeah.
So this is why it's so important that we have this conversation. I love that you talked about not being reactive. If you react the first time that they say something, it's going to be even harder for them to say something else. Now, if you have reacted before, I feel like you can still tell your children, hey, dad, mom reacted. I should have not done that. Yeah. Yes. I want to have this open relationship and conversations with you. And I also love that you said, don't assume that they know, because they will want to walk away from it. And I think it's important to, one of the things that I normally, and this is with leaders, for me, I'd say, hey, it's hard for me to have this conversation with you. I think it could be beneficial too. If it's awkward for you, tell your children, hey, I know this is awkward for you. It is awkward for me too. Yeah. He says, but I want to help you because I want you to have a biblical worldview. What does the Bible talk about? What does it say? Let's study this together. Let's talk about it. If you have questions, come to me first. Yeah. But we have to make sure it's a safe place for them.
Well, just tying with that, talking about let's figure this out together, brings to the point of don't let the shame of your own past get in the way of you being vulnerable with your kids. Like you said, they're not the first ones going through this. We've gone through it. We still go through it, and as we learn and are exposed to, look as being 35 years old, and I'm still being exposed to things, sex and pornography wise or whatever, that make me uncomfortable and make me ashamed. So when you do that with them, when you're able to even have a look, self-disclosure is not always a bad thing with your kids. It helps them realize that this is to be human. And again, you can be careful about the graphicness of details you put in your self-disclosure, but self-disclosure, I've seen too many kids where they assume that their parents were like these perfect angels when it came to sex and pornography because their parents have never shared their downfalls with it.
And then if they are exposed to something like that, they feel, well, I'm not as good as my parents. And they're like, well, they are not going to understand me.
So I'm not going to measure up and I'm inadequate. And so what they do is they hide and they will run to people that they can relate with. And usually that's the world. Yes. And they are not getting the best information when they run there.
Yes. That is so good. And, I want to encourage parents, if you're watching, and I'm assuming you're watching or listening, if you're listening to this point, but if one of your children tells you that it's watching pornography, that has watched pornography or has a pornography addiction, not to bring shame. If they are telling you something like that, it's been very difficult for them to even express that.
Yes.
So there are many resources out there that can help you as a family and for your children. Remember, a main thing is we want children to have a biblical worldview. What God says about this? Let's live our life to align with the Word of God. But Michael, what are some resources that you would advise maybe professional counseling to?
Sure. Counseling is always a great option. Going and talking to a professional that can help, not just give information, but it really can help guide you in how to have conversations. I mean, most of what I do in my practice most of the time is helping people have relationships, improve their relationships around there through communication and just how to have those. I mean, counseling itself is exemplifying intimate conversation, deep conversation, being comfortable. Just the exposure of going to counseling actually helps you become more comfortable in having tough conversations. So counseling's always a great option for that. And I would be happy to give resources. I work through a clinic called Transforming Life Counseling Center here in Edmond. Our website is www.tlccok.com. Go look at different bios are on there. Look at different counselors. Find the perfect fit for someone that's there that can probably help you. Or you can even contact me and I'll help you find it. But so the counseling is a great option. But the other options too is just in the world around us. We have plenty, you have mentors, trusted friends, pastors. I mean, go, like I said, Proverbs says that the wise man seeks counsel. In the abundance of counselors, there is wisdom.
Yeah.
Just go find the people around you that you trust. But don't forget the biggest source of them all, which are other parents around you.
Yes.
Other parents have been there or
Yeah.
are going through it. Talk to other parents. Find out what worked for them, what didn't work,
Yeah.
what they learned from it. You have an invaluable source in other parents.
Yeah.
So, don't forget to seek out counsel from those people as well.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for your wisdom, for sitting down and having this important conversations. I know this conversation is going to be a blessing to many, many parents. Now, parents, I want to encourage you, to share this podcast with other parents, because if you are going through this, you're not the only one.
Right.
There's many, many. We talked about the earliest age. I mean, it goes, the average age is 11 years old.
Yes.
Some of them even before 10 years
that.
old. So chances are that your children have been exposed to pornography. And I want this podcast to be a resource for you, but also share this with somebody else that could help them. If you have any questions that you would like for us to discuss, you can email us at parents@north.church. Thank you so much for joining us. Michael, thank you so much for being here
You're welcome.
with us today. Have a blessed day.
Yeah.